Hello and welcome to The Edge, presented by The Bluntness. I'm your host, Taylor, coming to you from Southern California, and today we have a very special guest. Andrew D'Angelo is a visionary leader with a proven track record of enacting systemic social change and developing best practices in cannabis. Andrew lends his vast cannabis business and political expertise as a consultant for hire to the global cannabis community. He has worked on a variety of voter legalization initiatives in California and DC, and is co-founder of Harborside and the Last Prisoner Project. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. Can you let us know where you're coming from?
Sure, Taylor, great to be with you. I am in my home office in Oakland, California.
Oh, very nice. All right, well, you are, clearly one of the titans of the industry. I know you've seen cannabis transition from the legacy market to the legal now. So can you just talk to us a little bit about that experience and how that transition has kind of looked from your perspective?
Sure, be happy to. Not so many people have the background I do. So I started in the legacy market because that's the only market there was if you loved cannabis. And I started in the 1980s. My older brother, Steve, a lot of you know, my older brother, Steve D'Angelo. He's almost 10 years older than me. So he was my introduction to the plant, and you couldn't really ask for a better guide or mentor than my brother, Steve. So in high school, I started trading cannabis. I fell in love with cannabis. It helped me a lot with what I was going through at the time, physically and mentally. And I decided I wanted this plant in my life. And I intuitively knew as a teenager that cannabis just made people feel better. And we didn't know anything about the medical cannabis, and we didn't know anything about how it was really helping people out in the Bay Area. I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I was in this little town called Alexandria, Virginia. I went to high school there. And so I sold weed to mainly the theater kids and musician kids, and then the more, let's say, privileged classmates of mine were also good customers, and we were all stoners, But in those days, you had to hide being a stoner, or else you got in big trouble if you got caught with even a tiny little bit of weed. You get kicked out of school, you can't go to college, you can't get a student loan. If you played sports like I did, you had to pee in a cup in order to, be on the sports team. So it was a much different time. And it was a hard time. It was a really hard time to be a stoner. And that's why I worked to change the laws because it was not fun seeing all my friends and colleagues that I was trading cannabis with, or people that were growing cannabis out here in California that I knew, kept getting busted and going to jail, and their lives being ruined. And in some cases, people, losing their lives because they get busted and they can't, it's such a bad situation that they take their own life, or it's sometimes they, die in prison, or sometimes other terrible things happen to folks in this war on weed that's been occurring for a long time now. So I didn't like being a criminal. That wasn't very fun. So we took some of the money, well, not a little bit more than some, quite a bit of the money we made selling weed, and we changed the laws with that money. And California, we did it in 1996, and in Washington, D.C., we did it 2 years later. When we went to implement the law in our hometown in Washington, D.C., the federal government blocked us from doing that because the Republicans were in power at that time. And even if the Democrats had been in power in 1998, they would not have allowed dispensaries and things like that to occur in Washington, D.C. Okay. So we didn't like that. And that didn't feel good. So California was calling because people that we knew were opening dispensaries there, and we wanted to be legal. We wanted to trade, and we had a dream of doing that. So we sold my mom's house, and we were coming out of a pretty bad bust. My brother got busted in 2001. And so we had to recover from that. And the only asset we had to start Harborside with was my mom's house. So we sold my mom's house. We applied for one of the first of 6 licenses ever issued, or 4, I think it was 4, by the city of Oakland. The city of Oakland was the first city to actually license something, even though the law had been around for 10 years. Nobody bothered licensing it. The elected officials, the politicians, they didn't want to touch cannabis. They didn't want to license it. Some people, you couldn't ban it because we had a law, but you could shut down dispensaries. You could work with the feds and the DEA to bust people, and plenty of towns and municipalities did. But Oakland is a pretty progressive place, somewhat radically progressive in those days. And the city functioned a lot better than it does now in those days. Although I think we have some good leaders coming up in the city right now that I'm excited about. But and we got this license, and we opened Harborside, and we had a different vision. We wanted, in those days, the dispensaries were pretty dangerous, right? Because you'd either get raided or you might get robbed because the police were against us. So they weren't protecting our businesses, and in many cases still aren't. That's a whole nother subject. But so most of the dispensaries in those days were just heavily guarded, had bars all over the windows, bulletproof glass, the whole 9 yards, and wasn't a great experience for people that were seriously ill. And we wanted to serve people that were seriously ill. That was the roots of the movement we came from. And we also wanted to serve stoners and other folks that were using cannabis for chronic pain or MS or, anxiety, depression, PTSD, you name it. Those conditions, you can't tell when someone walks in the dispensary if they have anxiety or PTSD or depression or chronic pain sometimes, if they're not in a wheelchair, if they're not on crutches. But I can tell you as a man in his 50s that chronic pain is very real. And about 20% of the adult population suffers from chronic pain. So we took the bars down, and we had a big open space, and we were a community healing center. We had all these free healing classes and support groups, and you could write letters to prisoners and get free weed. If you were poor and on government assistance, you get free weed at Harborside. We started the first cannabis lab, Steep Hills Lab, because we wanted to lab test our medicine. So, our vision was unique at that time, and people really loved it, and our community responded, and we opened a few more shops in California. And then we went from medical to adult use. Harborside also got embroiled in 2 federal legal cases with the federal government. One we won and one we lost. The one we lost was over 280E, tax provision 280E. Your listeners probably know about that, I would guess.
Yes, I just recently wrote about the difficulties of it. So
you can't be bluntness if you don't if you don't know about 280E. But we lost that case, and that case really hurt our ability to transition to adult use, which was very expensive. Prop 64 was a disaster. That's a whole nother story I'm sure you've already talked about, and we'll talk about with many other people. But it's very expensive to comply with Prop 64. And if you're a big company like Harborside was, and you have multiple locations, and you're got lots of buildings that need to be retrofitted and redone and all kinds of stuff for this new regulations, and you're selling a lot of weed, and all that weed has to be packaged and labeled and everything just right. And that first 6 months or a year, Prop 64 is just incredibly hard and expensive. So, Harborside eventually had to go public. We needed investors. We needed money to do that. And we were at a crossroads of whether we were going to, keep fighting the 280E case and take outside money, which we were nervous about, but we didn't want to give up on that case, and we wanted to keep going. And unfortunately, that meant that, we had to agree to exit, or I had to agree to exit Harborside. Didn't really want to do that, but that was part of what I had to agree to bring the money in. And now Harborside is a pretty big company. We just did a merger and acquisition, and with two companies, one called Loudpack, one called Urban Leaf. And so I think we have, 17 or 18 retail locations between the two flags, Harborside and Urban Leaf. We have manufacturing, we have a big farm, greenhouse, I might add, greenhouse, sun-grown farm.
Oh, very nice.
It's now a big, dare I say, corporate cannabis company. But that's what Harborside is now. And, still very active in the places we have shops. And I think still carrying the best line of products that are available in the legal market here. And, all of us in California, it's a very hard time in California. If you have a license, if you have a business, doesn't matter if you're big, small, craft. Harborside decided to go in the direction of scale instead of staying. We were kind of a small family business or larger family business. So we decided to go in that direction, but plenty of people decided to stay craft. And, my hope is that craft cannabis will not only survive this moment we're in, very difficult moment in Prop 64, but will eventually, rise up again and play a very prominent role in California cannabis. And I hope global cannabis, because we have that potential in California and Oregon to sort of be the weed basket of the world.
Yeah.
and I would like to see that happen. I think it would be good for my home state, my adopted home state that I love so much. Even though we have a lot of problems in California right now, I still love California and want to stay here. So let's all roll up our sleeves and work together to solve the problem is. So that's the Harborside story. When I left Harborside, I was a little burnt out on owning and operating company. So I started a nonprofit called Last Prisoner Project. And our mission is to free every cannabis prisoner, first in the United States and North America, then globally. We hope that our mission ends and we close our doors and all cannabis prisoners are now free and we don't have any more work to do. That's our goal.
Yes.
We have an awful long way to go, certainly globally, but even domestically, to achieve that vision, that aspiration. But, I go to work every day as a board member and co-founder of Last Prisoner Project in service of our constituents. There's no folks like, there's folks locked up right now. You can go to our website, lastprisonerproject.org, follow our social media. You can learn all about them, whether it be Kevin Allen or others that are locked up right now, and you can support them. And so that's what we try to do. And it's hard work. These folks are the most vulnerable among us and have been shafted by the system. And, I think we all have an obligation to help with that. So, and the industry's really responded to LPP. I'm very proud to say the community's really responded. We went from a fledgling, barely funded organization to being one of the better funded organizations doing this work right now. And we did that in a period of 3 or 4 years. So I'm very proud of that. And, I think so far this year, we've given $800,000 in grants directly to constituents that have been impacted by the war on cannabis. And, we have a little bit more money to give. We got a little ahead of ourselves and gave it out too fast. But if we run out, we'll just call on the community to help fill those coffers again. And when you give, our maximum grant right now is $5,000. And part of that is because we're audited so heavily by the IRS. We really have to, make sure that we are justifying our giving in an equal and fair way across the board. and most people need the full 5,000. I mean, you can imagine coming out of prison, you need 50,000, you need 100,000. I mean, you need a lot of money just to rebuild your life. So, these grants aren't nearly enough, but they're a way for people to start and or just help once they have started on their own. And so, it's because we want to help everybody and we can't. It's not possible. We don't have the funding to help every single person on earth who needs us. And it's heartbreaking when we can't help folks. Like Christian Reichardt in Illinois, he's a prisoner I know and love and I correspond with. And right now I can't get him out. He's still in his appeal process and hopefully he'll win those appeals and we'll be able to get him out. But we're a post-conviction organization. So it's tough when people are still fighting their cases, and we don't do that. There are other groups that do that, but we don't do that. But we do help people get clemency. We do help people get pardons. We do help people re-enter once they're out. We do, and we also hire the formerly incarcerated ourselves. So about 25-30% of our team is formerly incarcerated, and I hope to also increase that number over time and get some of these folks on our board of directors and in the highest levels of the organization.
Yeah.
So that's Last Prison Project. And then I'm a consultant. I help people build their cannabis companies from the ground up. I help people with dispensaries. I help people with grows and cultivation. I help people with industrial. I got a couple industrial hemp projects, nutrition and fiber I'm working on right now. CBD, of course, is always there. And I've got not plenty, but a few CBD folks in my portfolio. And I'm having a great time as a consultant because I get to touch lots of different parts of the industry. Right. And I get to build more than just one company. And I get to take all my experience, all my knowledge, and I see all the decisions. I've already made the decisions everyone's going to have to make, and I've already navigated, through all these loopholes, whether they be regulatory or operational, cultural. I've done it all, and I've seen it all. So that experience really helps my clients because we can tell the future before it happens. And the other thing I do is help people radically differentiate in the marketplace, because you got to do that. You got to stand out. It's already very competitive in our industry. So, that's the other thing I help people with. And then the third thing I'm involved with these days is I do a lot of communication work, thought leadership work, like I'm doing right now with you, and just spreading the message and mission of cannabis medicine and cannabis, industrial cannabis, and all things cannabis. So that's what I do.
Well, great. Thank you so much for that. And again, for anyone watching, lastprisonerproject.org, highly recommend checking it out and learning more about it, because you really are doing incredible work. So thank you for sharing that. Now for the fun and frenzied part of the interview, we've got some flash questions. So I'm going to fire out some questions your way. You've got 60 seconds to answer each one.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
All right. So first one, what is one cannabis product you cannot live without?
I can't live without Blue River Terpenes capsules. So Blue River Terps is a company here in California. They also have operations in Massachusetts and Florida. Tony Vazura, who is the founder of that, good buddy of mine. We actually helped him move from Colorado to California at Harborside. We incubated him right there in our Oakland shop, and he makes the best solvent-free hash and capsules. And I can't live without. I take them every day.
Very nice. All right. And what about some advice that you'd give to somebody who is interested in cannabis activism, or maybe working in a region that is still trying to legalize? What is the number one thing they should keep in mind?
Well, It's hard work being an activist and changing laws. So persistence is very important, and cooperating with your other activists. Sometimes we find ourselves in circular firing squads, and it's not helpful. So to the extent that we're all passionate about what we do, and some of us are more persistent than others, the more persistent the activists that I've met in my life, those are the ones that usually get the most done.
Yeah.
And those that are both persistent and cooperative and know how to create cooperation amongst other activists, then we can join together, and we're a lot stronger that way. And so if you're in a place where there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to reform cannabis laws, it's super important to form those coalitions with others. And when there are disagreements, and there will be disagreements, let's air our dirty laundry in private, behind closed doors, within our own community as much as we can. I know that sometimes tempers get flared and folks disagree, and we live in a world where it's really easy to vent those disagreements in a public way, whether it be on social media or any other format. And I just really encourage folks to do that behind closed doors. The more of a united front that wherever you are, that you present to lawmakers, the better your chances are of changing laws. Because a lot of these elected officials, no matter how liberal they may be or say they are, they're scared to embrace cannabis. They think it's going to hurt their careers. It actually will help their careers.
Yeah.
But they haven't gotten that through their minds and their hearts yet. It just hasn't happened. And if they see it, that we're divided, they'll say, oh, well, you guys don't even know what you want from us.
Right. Yeah.
So how can I give it to you? But if we present a united front, that's what we did in California in 1996. It was medical cannabis. People were dying of HIV, AIDS. The public was on our side. We put patients in front of the camera, sick people in front of the camera, not activists like me. Put the patients in front of the camera. Put the people that are most impacted in front of the camera. Let them tell their stories. Then you're going to hit people in the heart instead of the mind. And the heart moves people a lot more than the mind does, believe it or not. And if we can move people in the heart, then we'll get public support. And then if you have a united front and you have public support, the chances that elected officials will cooperate are much, much higher. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, but no, that's great. What is the most surprising thing that you found about working in cannabis?
Well, just the diversity of human beings that this plant has called to and brought together. I mean, I have clients that are conservative Republicans, and have totally different politics than I do, but we work together. We transcend those differences with the work we do together with cannabis. Our industry must be more diverse, and so what I've learned from all the diverse clients and social equity folks, I help a lot of social equity folks, all the social justice work I've done with prisoners, is that diversity has surprised me in terms of how beautiful it is, and also how powerful it is, and also challenging, because we come from different worlds in our society. If the way I grew up is different than the way you grew up, it's different than the way other people grew up, and some people come from broken families and poverty and really hard circumstances. Other people come from more privilege. Other people come from their own story that's all their own, that has their own challenges and their own traumas that they've had to overcome, and so sometimes it's hard for us to hear each other. But because of that diversity, right. And so when that happens, we just have to listen really closely to each other and try to extend our empathy and understanding and respect. But I've been both surprised and I'm pleasantly surprised and also, blown away by the power of just how diverse our tribe is, and how many different types of people this plant is speaking to right now in this time that we're living in.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. All right, so what is the first thing you would say to somebody who has never tried cannabis but is interested in trying it? What would be your first advice?
Well, don't be afraid and go slow. Those are the two things. Cannabis can be very powerful if you've never had those receptors stimulated without external cannabinoids. So, and if it can be an uncomfortable experience, especially with edibles, if you take too much too early in your career as a user. So that, just be mindful, go slow, but don't be afraid, and make sure you have a good guide and good education for the products and the things you're experiencing. And I generally tell new folks, don't do this alone. Make sure you're with others. Cannabis is really a social experience, and in the beginning, especially if folks are with people that are more experienced, you can talk about the experience. You can say, hey, this is how I'm feeling right now, or isn't the colors are amazing, or I'm seeing like little trails with my hands, or or this food, it tastes different than it ever has before, or touch is much. And the guides and the folks around you can say, yeah, isn't that great? That's the magic of cannabis, and that's why we're all here together taking it. So that would be my advice.
Okay, well, speaking of cannabis experiences, lastly, tell us about your first experience.
Well, I because Steve was my older brother, I had some early experiences as a teenager. The one I remember most clearly was an edible experience when I was about, 13 or 14 years old. I was pretty young. Yeah. And I can't remember why I agreed to take the edibles, because I was, my brother was always sort of, once I became a teenager, his feeling was it was time to at least offer me cannabis. And he had educated me all about it. Of course, I grew up with it. So, but I was an athlete, so I usually said no. But on this particular occasion, for some reason, I said yes. And I had a really fantastic experience. My brother, we were driving all around town, and we were meeting a lot of his clients at that time. And I was just super stoned, but in a really powerfully good, positive way. And so I got to sort of go with him on his rounds. I remember it was raining that day. It was a sort of a warm spring day, and it was raining. And I remember seeing the rain on the windshield of the car. Was quite a psychedelic experience in that moment. And I remember just feeling euphoric and joyful and very connected to the plant, watching those raindrops, make those patterns on the windshield, on the window. And just meeting some really cool, freaky people while I was in that state of mind was a lot of fun, because they're all creative, interesting, fun people. I remember one gentleman was a video editor, and he had all these video monitors all over, and he had been, he was an activist, and in those days there were all kinds of peace demonstrations against nukes and all different things that he was filming, and I was interested in the arts and at that time in my life. And so it was really fun to be stoned in that state of mind and learning about this videos and seeing all this equipment and getting turned on to that part of life, the artistic part of life. I was an athlete, not an artist, so that was new to me. And a year or two later, I gave up my athletics to be. I tried to be in the theater and film and the arts for a good long time when I was a young man, and so that first experience sort of played a role in that evolution of my evolution, I think. And like I said earlier, I have my older brother, Steve, so you couldn't ask for a better guide than Steve DeAngelo. So I got a little bit lucky there.
Yeah, you definitely hit the jackpot there.
Yeah, I did.
All right, Andrew. Well, thank you so much. You've been listening to The Edge presented by The Bluntness. Thank you for joining me today. And everyone watching, feel free to give us a review, a like, or share this with your followers. For more bluntness in your life, you can always find us on social media or directly at the source, thebluntness.com. And Andrew, to take us out, where can we find you online?
AndrewDeangelo.com, my website. That's the best place to find me. And I'm Andrew_D'Angelo on all the social media, even on TikTok.
Great. All right. Well, AndrewDeangelo.com. And again, lastprisonerproject.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor. It's great to be with you today.